That morning, I strapped my 3-year-old son into his car seat, holding a lottery ticket worth $48 million. My hands were trembling as I imagined telling my husband Daniel that our lives were about to change forever. I believed we were finally stepping into a better future. But when I reached the door of his office, my entire world collapsed in a single moment. Through the wall, I heard Daniel laughing with a woman whose voice I recognized instantly, Chloe Benton, the woman he once insisted was nothing more than a helpful employee. Their laughter was loud enough to drown out my heartbeat. Then came the words that cut through me more sharply than any knife. Just a few more months and I'll push her out with nothing. Me, the wife who supported him through every setback, the mother who stayed home to raise our child while he pursued success. I stood frozen, my son shifting in my arms, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath our lives had just shifted forever. I had come to deliver a miracle. Instead, I uncovered a plan to erase me completely. That was the moment I chose silence, not weakness, strategy. Before that day, I would have told you my life was ordinary in the quietest and safest ways. I met Daniel Greer when I was 26, back when I was working as a junior graphic designer in Charleston. He had big dreams, confident eyes, and a way of talking that made every plan sound foolproof. When he asked me to move to Atlanta with him, I believed we were building a future together, not walking toward a storm I could not yet see. For the first few years, our marriage felt steady. Daniel worked long hours at a regional construction supply company, climbing the ladder with ambition that sometimes bordered on obsession. I stayed home after our son Ethan was born, partly by choice, and partly because Daniel insisted it would be better for our family. He often said, "I make the money, you focus on the house." I thought it was partnership. Looking back, it was control dressed up as care. The small comments began to pile up over time. When I asked about our savings, he would sigh as if I were interrupting something important. When I mentioned wanting to freelance again, he reminded me that daycare was expensive and my income would barely matter. I convinced myself he was stressed, not dismissive. I convinced myself love meant patience. But the truth was simpler. Daniel liked being the one in charge. He liked holding the wallet, the decisions, and eventually the power. I tried to ignore the growing emptiness between us, telling myself every marriage went through phases. Yet deep down I felt it, a quiet shift, a distance that stretched further each month. Still I stayed. For Ethan. For the promise I thought we made. I had no idea how far Daniel had already drifted away from that promise. The morning everything changed started like any other, which is what makes it so hard to forget. Ethan was in his booster seat, swinging his legs and humming the little tune he always used when he was excited. I had just poured his cereal when I noticed the lottery ticket tucked under a magnet on the fridge. I almost laughed at myself. I had bought it on a whim after a long grocery trip, the kind of purchase you make when you want to feel a little hopeful. I scanned the numbers absent-mindedly at first, then I looked again, and again. My heart climbed into my throat. Every number matched, all 6. I pressed a hand to my mouth to muffle the sound rising in my chest. Ethan looked up at me and giggled as if I had just told a joke. He had no idea his world had shifted before breakfast. After a few minutes of pacing, whispering, "Oh my God," over and over, reality settled in. $48 million. Enough to secure Ethan's future, to pay every bill, to ease the strain I had felt in my husband's voice for months. For one fragile moment, I imagined Daniel lifting me in his arms, grateful, relieved, amazed by our luck. I packed Ethan into the car and drove straight to Daniel's office, rehearsing how I would tell him. I kept thinking, this will fix everything. Maybe the distance between us will finally close. But as I stepped into the hallway leading to his office, a sound stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. Daniel's, and then a woman's voice layered over his, playful and too familiar. "Chloe." I edged closer, my heartbeat hammering as I listened. A few seconds later, the words that would change my life slid through the crack under the door, words I was never meant to hear. That was the moment hope died, and clarity took its place. I stood there frozen, as their voices tangled together like a conversation they had repeated many times. Chloe's laugh was soft at first, then sharper, as if she were teasing him. Daniel lowered his voice, but the walls were thin and every word drifted out with cruel clarity. "She will never see it coming. Just a few more months and I'll push her out with nothing." My stomach twisted. My fingers tightened around Ethan's small backpack until the zipper pressed into my palm. I leaned closer, barely breathing, hoping I had misunderstood, but Daniel kept talking, each sentence slicing deeper. She thinks staying home makes her valuable. Please, she has no idea how money works. I handle everything. Once the paperwork is ready, she is gone. Chloe sighed, pretending to be concerned. Are you sure she won't fight it? Daniel laughed. She can't even read our tax forms. She will sign whatever I put in front of her. For a moment I felt weightless, like my body had separated from itself. The man inside that room was not the man I married. Not the man I moved states for. Not the father I wanted for my son. This was someone who saw me as a burden he needed to discard. My first instinct was to burst through the door, to scream, to demand answers. But Ethan shifted in my arms, resting his head against my shoulder with complete trust. That tiny gesture snapped something into place inside me. This was no longer about my heartbreak. This was about my son's future, our safety, our dignity. I turned and walked away without a sound, my steps steady even though my chest felt like it was caving in. Outside, the sunlight was bright and warm, completely unaware of the storm unraveling inside me. In that moment, one truth settled into my bones. Daniel had already chosen his side. Now it was my turn to choose mine. I drove back to Charleston that afternoon without telling Daniel a thing. Ethan slept most of the way, his little hand clutching the corner of his blanket while my mind raced with questions that had no gentle answers. Every mile I put between us and Atlanta felt like pulling a thorn out of my skin, slowly and painfully. When I reached my mother's house, she opened the door with the same warm smile she had worn my entire life. But the moment she saw my face, the smile faded. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply took Ethan into her arms and guided me inside, letting me speak only when I was ready. I told her everything. The lottery ticket, the betrayal, the plan Daniel had so proudly shared with another woman. My mother listened in silence, her jaw tightening with each detail. When I was done, she placed her hand over mine and said the words I needed most. You and your son will not be anyone's discard pile. The next morning, we went together to claim the winnings. I asked her to put the money in her name temporarily, the safest way to keep Daniel from sniffing it out. She did not hesitate. She had watched me pour years of my life into a marriage that had forgotten how to value me. With the jackpot secured, I made one promise to myself. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not crumble. Instead, I would return to Atlanta and let Daniel think I was still the same quiet wife he believed he could control. Because the most powerful revenge does not start with rage, it starts with preparation. When I returned to Atlanta a week later, I walked into our house with the same calm expression Daniel had always expected from me. He barely looked up from his phone when I set my bag down. Everything okay, he asked, as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. I nodded and smiled, the same practiced smile I had worn for years. Inside, however, everything had changed. A few days later, Daniel suggested I help out at his company since they were short-staffed. The offer was not kindness, it was convenience. He wanted a free assistant who would not dare question him. I agreed without hesitation, and his ego took the bait so easily it almost frightened me. From the moment I stepped into the office, Chloe looked at me like I had shown up uninvited to a party she believed she owned. She handed me pointless tasks, filing, sorting receipts, organizing storage rooms while she hovered around Daniel like a smug shadow. But if she thought busy work would distract me, she had underestimated the woman she mocked behind closed doors. The real breakthrough came in the form of Elaine Porter, the company's senior accountant. Elaine was quiet, efficient, and carried an air of exhaustion that hung on her like a worn coat. One afternoon, when I delivered a stack of invoices to her office, I noticed her rubbing her temples as she stared at a spreadsheet. She asked softly, "Do you trust your husband?" The question stunned me. Before I could answer, she sighed. "I have been here long enough to know when something is wrong. And something is very wrong." Over the next week, Elaine slowly revealed pieces of the truth. Daniel had been shifting profits into a separate entity called Greer Holdings, listed under his cousin's name. The company appeared to be failing on paper, but in reality, it was generating far more money than Daniel reported. He was preparing to claim bankruptcy while preserving every dollar for himself. Elaine eventually gave me limited access to the financial records. She did not ask why I wanted them. Maybe she saw the fear in my eyes. Maybe she had her own scars from trusting the wrong people. Either way, I finally had something Daniel never intended for me to have. Proof. With every document Elaine handed me, the shape of Daniel's plan became clearer. He wasn't just preparing to leave me. He was preparing to erase me financially, emotionally, and legally. The man I once trusted had turned our marriage into a strategy board, and he believed he was 10 moves ahead. What he didn't realize was that I had quietly begun building a board of my own. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I drove to a small coffee shop on the edge of the city to meet someone I hadn't seen in years. Trent Dawson. He had been a close friend during college, the kind of friend who always looked out for everyone else even when he had his own struggles. Recently I'd learned that Daniel's company had backed out of a major contract with Trent's firm, leaving Trent jobless and drowning in debt. When I told him everything Daniel had done and everything he was planning, Trent didn't respond with anger. Instead, he leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, "I always knew he played dirty. I just didn't know how far he would go." We talked for hours, piecing together a plan that was less about revenge and more about survival. Using a small portion of the money my mother was safeguarding, we would start a competing supplier company built on transparency and reliability. The goal wasn't to destroy Daniel. The goal was to create something stronger, something honest, something that wouldn't leave customers feeling cheated or manipulated. Elaine quietly provided us with insight into the market Daniel had been ignoring, pointing us toward clients who were unhappy with his service but felt trapped due to limited options. Trent reached out to his old contacts, rebuilding bridges that Daniel had burned. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of direction, a sense of control returning to me. This wasn't loud vengeance. It wasn't rage. It was simply reclaiming what had been taken from me piece by piece. By the time we finalized the business plan, one truth had settled deep within me. Daniel believed I was powerless. He had no idea how wrong he was. The shift did not happen overnight. It started quietly, almost invisibly, like a single loose thread in a tailored suit. But pull it long enough, and the entire outfit begins to fall apart. That was exactly what happened to Daniel. Within the first month of launching our new company, Dawson & Greer Supply, we secured 3 medium-sized clients who were frustrated with late deliveries, inconsistent pricing, and Daniel's dismissive attitude. Trent handled operations with the kind of passion only someone who had been burned could bring. I managed the administrative side, building relationships with customers who were relieved to finally feel heard. At first, Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy entertaining Chloe in his office and micromanaging employees who were already stretched thin. But soon missed calls from clients and declining sales reports began piling on his desk. I watched from across the office as he snapped at his staff, slammed drawers, and blamed everyone except himself. By the second month, the cracks widened. One of Daniel's biggest contractors switched to us after discovering he had been overcharged for nearly a year. Then another left, fed up with the constant excuses. Each loss tightened the noose on Daniel's pride, and his frustration seeped into every corner of the office. Chloe was the first to show signs of panic. She cornered me in the hallway one morning, demanding to know if I had said anything negative about her or the company to clients. I simply smiled and said, "Communication is important. Maybe you should try it." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. As more clients left, Daniel's temper spiraled. He began firing employees at random, reshuffling roles, and making promises he couldn't keep. The office atmosphere turned cold and tense, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the final collapse. What Daniel didn't realize was that the collapse wasn't caused by sabotage. It was caused by his own choices, his arrogance, his shortcuts, his belief that he was untouchable. All I did was step out of the way and let the truth catch up. By the end of the 3rd month, the company that once boasted stability was bleeding money, and Daniel, for the first time since I had known him, looked genuinely afraid. Daniel's fear didn't soften him. It hardened him. Instead of facing the consequences of his actions, he turned his frustration toward the easiest target he had ever known: me. One evening he came home unusually early, tossing a stack of papers onto the kitchen counter. His voice was steady, practiced, almost rehearsed. "I think it's time we make things official. Our marriage hasn't been working for a long time." I glanced at the papers. Divorce documents. Clean, simple, designed to leave me with nothing. No assets, no spousal support. A neat agreement that painted me as someone who contributed little and deserved even less. He waited for me to fall apart. He wanted tears, confusion, desperation. Instead, I nodded slowly. "If this is what you want," I said quietly. He mistook my calmness for surrender. Over the next few days, he acted lighter, almost cheerful, as if removing me from his life would magically restore his failing business. Chloe became bolder, staying at the house more often. brushing past me like she already owned the place. I let her. I let both of them believe the narrative they had created. When the court date arrived, Daniel walked in with confidence, wearing a suit that no longer impressed me. He spoke to the judge with charm, painting himself as a hard-working provider supporting a dependent wife. I sat silently waiting. Then it was my turn. I handed the judge a folder. Inside were the financial records Elaine had given me, the audio recordings of Daniel discussing his plan with Chloe, and documented evidence of his undisclosed assets hidden through Greer Holdings. The courtroom shifted. Daniel's face drained of color. The judge paused, reviewing each page with increasing severity. When he finally looked up, his expression left no room for misunderstanding. "Mr. Greer, it appears you have been intentionally concealing assets and preparing fraudulent financial statements. A full investigation will be required." For the first time, Daniel looked at me not with arrogance but with disbelief. He had built his plan on the assumption that I was blind. He never imagined I could see clearly enough to expose every lie. That day, the truth finally spoke for itself. When the hearing ended, I walked out of the courtroom with Ethan's hand in mine, and a lightness in my chest I had not felt in years. Daniel stayed behind, surrounded by attorneys whispering urgently in his ear. Chloe slipped out a side door, avoiding his eyes. Their alliance had crumbled the moment honesty entered the room. Over the next several months, life unfolded quietly but beautifully. The investigation into Daniel's finances moved forward, and his business continued to sink under the weight of his own choices. I didn't need to watch it happen. I didn't need updates or gossip. Some endings don't require an audience. Meanwhile, the company Trent and I built began to grow steadily, not explosively, not dramatically, just steadily, rooted in trust and fairness, the very things our customers had been craving all along. Each small success felt like a step toward reclaiming the woman I had once lost inside that marriage. Back in Charleston, Ethan and I settled into a life that felt warm and real. We rented a modest house near the water, where he could run barefoot in the yard, and I could breathe without waiting for the next sharp word or criticism. My mother visited often, reminding me in her quiet way that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stays standing. I also started a small fund to help women facing financial control in their relationships, not as charity but as a lifeline for those who, like me, had been told they were powerless. Looking back, I realized something profound. Silence had saved me. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of strategy. The silence that listens, learns, and chooses the right moment to speak. If Marissa's journey moved you, take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment about where you're watching from. Your story matters, your voice matters, and sometimes reclaiming your life begins with one quiet decision